Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in the Missouri backwoods. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. The year was 1887, and the dense forests of Phelps County, Missouri, were quiet beyond what most would consider ordinary. A fog lay thick over the hollows, and the timbered hills seemed to swallow sound. Into this isolation came the brothers Harlan and Silas Whitmore, proprietors of a modest sawmill that locals had long spoken of in uneasy tones. County records describe their property as a narrow swath of cleared land, bordered by ancient oaks and the winding St. James Creek. Contemporary accounts later preserved in journals and affidavits consistently note the brothers' meticulous nature, particularly their obsession with grinding timber to precise dimensions. Yet, as the year progressed, the community would begin to suspect that the Whitmores' activities extended beyond the mill's saws. Background on the Whitmores is sparse, but what exists paints a peculiar picture. They were the sons of a modest logging family, their father, Jeremiah Whitmore, having purchased the tract of land in the early 1860s. Earlier census data confirms the family's relocation from central Missouri, with a reputation for quiet industriousness, but also noted eccentricities. Neighbors described the brothers as civil enough, though one never could say what they were thinking. In statements preserved in later court affidavits, the brothers rarely traveled beyond the county lines, and even local traders reported that Harlan Whitmore, the elder by 2 years, had an almost ritualistic attention to the cutting of each tree, measuring its girth and taper before it ever met the saw. Their sawmill, situated on a gentle rise above St. James Creek, was described in a 1887 ledger by a visiting carpenter as an efficient operation. But the air around it seems heavier than the woods beyond. One cannot hear the wind without thinking it carries a whisper. While this could easily have been the poetic musing of a traveler, multiple residents recorded an uneasy sense about the Whitmores' work. Accounts collected decades later mention that farmhands hired for short periods would vanish for hours, only to return with vague explanations or not at all, prompting rumors of hidden spaces or subterranean storage. In one particularly haunting entry from a minister's journal, he noted that the brothers' workhouse smelled of resin and something darker, a tang that made the horses shy and the men uneasy. Early incidents escalated subtly. A neighbor, Thomas Keegan, testified in 1893 that on an evening in late March 1887 he had heard the clatter of the mill beyond reason, as if a dozen men labored when only 2 were present, and later what he described as a cry not human, nor yet holy beast. These kinds of observations were often dismissed in county newspapers, but recurring mentions appear in private letters preserved in the Phelps County Historical Archives. Another witness, a traveling merchant named Lyle Branson, recalled leaving goods near the mill and seeing odd shapes moving under the moonlight, crouched and hurried, as though the night itself was a participant. As spring progressed, reports of disappearing livestock combined with occasional unexplained noises became too consistent to ignore. County constables made casual visits, noting the mill's outward operation was legitimate, yet their ledgers reflect unease and unverified reports. Even the sheriff, in a memorandum dated June 1887, admitted that, though no crime is proven, the place carries a weightiness of wrong that I cannot place a hand upon. The early stirrings of rumor would soon solidify into something far darker, a pattern that would eventually draw investigators into the backwoods depths of Phelps County, revealing details that would haunt records and folklore for decades. The following months saw a slow, almost imperceptible escalation. The Whitmore brothers' sawmill became increasingly active at odd hours, and locals began to note the persistent absence of itinerant workers or those briefly hired for labor. County journals record that by midsummer 1887, several men who had sought temporary employment never returned to the main road. Some neighbors, in statements later preserved in Phelps County archives, noted seeing wagons leaving the mill in the pre-dawn hours, their loads covered with tarpaulins and returning empty by nightfall. One farmer, Joseph Harwell, recalled that on a humid July morning, he spied the brothers at the mill with hands blackened and clothes stained as if from the depths of a well. Not mere sawdust or sap, an observation that he described as the sort of thing one notes, and then prays not to understand. The geography of the area made deeper inspection difficult. The mill was set on a sloped clearing surrounded by dense, almost impenetrable woods. The St. James Creek provided both a natural barrier and a convenient means of transporting timber. The topography, later documented in county survey maps, made casual observation nearly impossible, and locals relied on second-hand reports, often filtered through weeks of rumor. In the handwritten diaries of an itinerant preacher, one entry describes the isolation. You may hear the creak, and yet not a footfall. One wonders if the earth itself is holding a secret. By August, accounts of odd behavior intensified. Several residents reported hearing strange mechanical noises late at night, metallic clinks and heavy thumps that could not be traced to any known machinery. One witness, a schoolteacher named Eliza Benton, noted that while walking past the mill at dusk, she saw shadows not in the form of men, but moving like the bending of the trees themselves, a comment later cited in a 1901 review of county anomalies. This witness also mentioned the smell, a pungent, sour hint that did not belong to the timber or the animals in the yard. Midway through the summer, a casual callback to Phelps County's broader history provides context. The region was no stranger to rumors of isolation and disappearance. In records surrounding the county seat, there are repeated mentions of missing persons and unexplained occurrences tied to rural homesteads, though few cases as persistent or as sinister as those associated with the Whitmores. One local newspaper in Rolla described the county in 1885 as a place where the whispering hills may hide more than trees. Such references, while general, underscore the unnerving normalcy of suspicion in these isolated communities. Investigators eventually became involved when a local constable, aided by a deputy from Rolla, attempted a daytime inspection of the mill. Their ledger notes that the Whitmores were cooperative but keen-eyed, as if measuring the men more than the timber. During this visit, the constable observed unusual architectural modifications, small, reinforced compartments beneath the mill floorboards, covered by removable planks. Though initial inspection revealed nothing, further interest was piqued by the discovery of partially buried, unidentified animal remains near the creek bank. Bones too large to belong to domestic livestock but insufficiently complete to determine exact origin. These observations would later form the skeletal basis for investigative reports circulated privately among Missouri law enforcement and later recounted in folklore. By September, the mill's reputation among locals had shifted from simple curiosity to open wariness. Children were warned to avoid the property, and farmers rerouted paths to prevent passing too close. Accounts from letters preserved in county archives suggest that even the postmaster hesitated to deliver correspondence near the mill without accompaniment. One entry reads, "The air here is thick, not with fog alone, but with a weight that makes a man doubt his own steps." Though no formal charges had yet been pressed, the fabric of fear surrounding the Whitmores was solidifying, setting the stage for the grim discoveries that would follow. As autumn approached in 1887, the unease surrounding the Whitmore sawmill deepened. County records indicate that the foliage was turning, and with the shorter days, the forested hollows seemed to close in with an almost deliberate intent. Reports from neighbors noted that the mill remained active well past sundown, its lanterns flickering like distant, watchful eyes amid the creeping darkness. An entry in the private journal of Reverend Amos Telford, a local clergyman who occasionally preached in the surrounding townships, recalls that on a chilly October evening, he felt compelled to turn back before reaching the mill, for the sounds within were of labor, yes, but of a labor wholly unfamiliar to mortal industry. Such testimonies were consistently recorded in county documents, later cross-referenced with affidavits from local lawmen. The first concrete incidents prompting a formal investigation occurred in early October. A farmer named Samuel Cartwright reported finding a small, partially buried crate in the underbrush near the creek. The crate contained unidentifiable, charred remnants, which he described in his affidavit as neither holy bone nor holy timber, yet carrying the scent of something that ought not be here. Though Cartwright initially brought the matter to the local constable, by the time law enforcement arrived, the crate had vanished. County journals note the constable's own frustration. "I cannot explain its absence, and yet the witness is steadfast in his claim." The Whitmores themselves displayed an increasingly meticulous concern for secrecy. Their ledger, later found among surviving papers, contained detailed accounts of timber shipments, but also included coded entries that contemporaneous analysts interpreted as references to hidden compartments, times of unusual activity, and the movement of unidentified items. A casual call back to Phelps County's history emphasizes the strangeness of such behavior. While the county had long been home to logging families, no other documented sawmill operations exhibited such obsessive documentation of daily activity, especially when the records veiled, rather than clarified, the nature of the work being done. Rumors began to multiply in neighboring towns. Some spoke of vanished strangers, others whispered of noises resembling grinding or crushing that could not be explained by the saws alone. A letter preserved in the archives of Rolla's Historical Society recounts a story told by a traveling merchant. He had approached the mill after dark and saw shadows that seemed to move within walls where no one ought to dwell, and the odor of resin and something fouler filled the night air. Such anecdotes, though unverified, reinforced the perception of the Whitmores as men working at the edges of normalcy. Escalation became unavoidable when an early winter frost revealed disturbed soil patterns near the mill. Local boys reported mounds of freshly turned earth in areas where previously only underbrush had grown. County survey notes later document that these mounds formed a deliberate grid pattern, suggestive of repeated digging rather than natural erosion. Further examination by constables, constrained by the threat of winter storms, revealed fragments of small wooden boxes and remnants of material too decomposed to identify conclusively. Journal entries from 1888 describe these findings with a clinical detachment. The fragments offer no clues as to species or purpose, save that the earth has been violated repeatedly. Investigators soon noted that the Whitmores' behavior had shifted subtly in parallel with these discoveries. Harlan, previously meticulous but approachable, became guarded and terse. Silas, once taciturn, now actively deflected questioning, insisting on legitimate business practices while hinting at rumors of theft or vandalism to cover any intrusion. County newspapers of the period carried sparse reports, often couched in euphemistic language. Several locals have observed unusual activity near the mill, though the proprietors maintain industrious standards. By the end of October, the first in-depth investigative visit concluded that, though no formal crime could yet be proven, the pattern of oddity, secrecy, and disturbance could not be ignored. Constables' reports noted, "Every examination yields more questions than answers, and the Whitmores watch every movement with a calculation unsettling in its precision." It was clear that the quiet backwoods of Phelps County were harboring something far beyond simple sawmill operations, a truth that would slowly begin to surface in the following months. By late 1887, the Whitmore sawmill had acquired an air of almost ritualistic secrecy. Multiple county records from Phelps County indicate that the brothers began restricting access to the property entirely, turning away even long-standing neighbors who had previously done business with them. One affidavit from a local blacksmith, Elias Morton, describes being waved off by Harlan Whitmore with the words, "Some matters are best left to the mill and the men who tend it." Morton's recollection emphasizes a subtle threat in the phrasing, unusual even for the cautious, isolated norms of Backwoods, Missouri. The first disappearances that could be directly linked to the Whitmores were documented in mid-November. A traveling lumberhand, Jasper Quinn, failed to return to Rolla after visiting the mill. Quinn's employer later filed a missing person report noting that His last known words were to remark on the brothers' odd, unrelenting precision and the smell of sap so heavy it clung to the hair of the head and the hands. The report became part of an investigative dossier kept by the county sheriff, who expressed doubt over the apparent lack of evidence but noted the pattern of vanishing laborers. Witnesses began reporting increasingly disturbing phenomena. Mary Linton, who lived downstream near St. James Creek, recalled seeing a wagon leaving the mill under cover of darkness, covered with tarps, and returning empty hours later. In her later testimony, preserved in Historical Society archives, she stated, "I cannot say what I saw, but I am certain it was not mere timber that rode beneath those coverings." Another account, from a local hunter, mentions observing the brothers moving objects with great care into what appeared to be a hidden cellar beneath the mill floor. Though no opening could be located from the exterior, these reports collectively painted a picture of covert activity beyond ordinary logging operations. Amid these developments, investigators referenced the broader context of Phelps County, Missouri, which at the time had its share of isolation-induced anxieties. Historical surveys indicate that logging families often lived with considerable solitude, making the disappearance of outsiders difficult to trace. A 1885 county review described the region as a forested labyrinth where the land itself may conceal what man cannot see, a sentiment later recalled in correspondence among officials examining the Whitmore case. The echoes of these earlier assessments framed the brothers' operations within a landscape already predisposed to suspicion, magnifying local unease. The first direct inspection of the mill's interior occurred in late November, conducted under the guise of routine tax assessment. Investigators noted the saws were functional, and timber stacks appeared ordinary, yet subtle irregularities were observed. Floorboards showed signs of recent removal and replacement. Small compartments, some lined with rough planking, suggested concealed storage. Journal entries from that period detail the meticulous care taken by the brothers to disguise these modifications, implying both knowledge of and intent to mislead casual observers. Rumors proliferated among the county's residents. Schoolchildren whispered of the grinding brothers. Farmers avoided the property after dark, and a traveling preacher wrote of a heaviness in the air, as if the mill breathed more than timber. Although these accounts were largely anecdotal, investigators treated them as corroborative, documenting them alongside affidavits from witnesses who had observed nighttime activity, disappearing workers, and suspicious transport of covered loads. In late December, a discovery was made that would mark the first undeniable evidence of wrongdoing. A local constable, while surveying the property's perimeter, noticed a disturbed patch of soil partially hidden by saplings. Upon careful excavation, fragments of charred wood and unidentifiable organic matter were recovered. County records described the findings with remarkable restraint. The material recovered does not allow positive identification, but suggests repeated interment of small objects beneath the earth. This clinical notation underscores the investigative style of the period, avoiding conjecture while recording anomalous physical evidence. The unsettling pattern was clear. The Whitmores maintained an operational sawmill while concealing activities that suggested something far darker. Reports noted the brothers' increasingly defensive posture and their avoidance of townsfolk, creating a climate of tension and suspicion. The winter of 1887 closed in, yet the mysteries of the mill and the backwoods it occupied had only begun to reveal themselves, leaving county investigators with more questions than answers. Winter settled over Phelps County in early 1888, and the Whitmore Sawmill, despite its seasonal challenges, remained active in ways that confounded both locals and investigators. County ledgers note an unusually high volume of timber processed during January and February, yet deliveries recorded at nearby towns failed to match the output. One constable's memorandum remarked, "Saws grind as though fed by more than men. Yet only the brothers labor here." Such observations fueled whispered speculation among the sparse communities, further isolating the Whitmores within the forested landscape. By late February, a pattern of missing persons had become undeniable. Journal entries preserved in Phelps County archives indicate that two itinerant carpenters, the McCall brothers, vanished after arriving to work briefly at the mill. A local merchant who had seen them the evening prior stated in an affidavit that the men went willingly enough, yet they did not return, nor did their effects remain, save for tools scattered as if abandoned in haste. The sheriff's office compiled these reports, but evidence remained circumstantial. No bodies or definitive proof linked the Whitmores directly to the disappearances. The investigative focus shifted when a timber buyer, Leonard Graves, recounted noticing unusual soil disturbances near the creek that ran alongside the mill. In his affidavit, Graves described rectangular depressions in the soft winter soil, aligned with the foundation of the mill, as though excavation had been deliberate and systematic. While these signs did not immediately yield evidence of human remains, later testimony noted that animal bones, broken and charred, were found nearby, suggesting repeated burial activity. These findings were recorded clinically, with phrases such as evidence of repeated interment, species undetermined, reflecting the period's restrained investigative tone. Neighbors' accounts increasingly contributed to a sense of dread surrounding the property. One elderly woman, Martha Hensley, recalled children avoiding the mill entirely, for they said the saws sang at night in a voice no man should hear. Others spoke of the brothers' nocturnal activity, lanterns moving silently between buildings, heavy carts traversing the mill yard, and the occasional, inexplicable smell of burning resin mixed with something foul. These anecdotal accounts, though unverified, were meticulously noted by the sheriff in anticipation of formal inspection. A key turning point occurred in March 1888. Two constables, accompanied by a deputy from Rolla, conducted a formal search of the mill under pretext of tax and safety inspection. They noted multiple floorboards that could be lifted, revealing narrow storage spaces beneath the mill floor. While initially empty, these compartments hinted at the brothers' intent to conceal objects or activities. Later, small journals found within the property contained coded entries detailing movements of workers and materials, at times when the mill should have been idle, reinforcing the perception that the Whitmores maintained a hidden agenda beyond normal timber processing. Even within these developments, historical context from Phelps County offered perspective. The region had long been associated with rumors of vanishings, isolated homesteads, and unaccountable noises echoing through the hollows. A county history compiled in 1885 notes that the hills and woods hold secrets older than the towns themselves, and investigators routinely referenced these accounts to frame contemporary anomalies without resorting to speculation. The Whitmores, therefore, became a particularly sinister focal point in an environment already attuned to suspicion. The tension escalated further when a hiker reported seeing what he described as shadows crouching beneath the mill during a morning walk in late March. Though anecdotal, investigators noted that the same time frame corresponded with unusual activity in ledger entries and witness statements regarding disappearing wagons and night-time labor. Journalistic reports in Rolla, though cautious, began to hint at peculiar operations occurring at the Whitmore Sawmill, marking the first time the broader public took notice, even if only obliquely. By the end of March, the stage was set for discoveries that would cement the Whitmores' place in Phelps County lore. Investigators, constrained by weather and terrain, had accumulated mounting evidence of secretive activity, disturbed soil, coded journals, night-time labor, and multiple disappearances. While nothing could yet be definitively proven, the tension in the county was palpable. Locals would speak for decades of that winter, of a mill that hummed in the shadows, and of two brothers whose work seemed to grind more than timber, leaving investigators and townsfolk alike to wonder what truly lay beneath the sawdust and floorboards. Spring 1888 brought little reprieve to the already tense atmosphere surrounding the Whitmore Sawmill. Melting snow revealed more evidence of soil disturbance along the creek's edge and near the mill's foundation. County records describe investigators noting several shallow pits, partially hidden by fallen branches and brush, each showing signs of repeated digging. One sheriff's memorandum dryly recorded, "The soil shows repeated human agency, contents indeterminate. Further inspection warranted." These notations reflect the clinical, unsensational style typical of late 19th century investigative reporting, leaving conjecture to the observer. By mid-April, local farmers were openly uneasy. Affidavits preserved in the Phelps County archives recount neighbors avoiding the mill, altering routes across the hollows, and warning children against approaching the property. A statement by farmer Nathaniel Price reads, "I do not know what lies within those walls, but the air about it carries a weight that even the wind dares not lift." Such expressions of instinctive fear, though not formally actionable, contributed to a growing consensus that the Whitmore's operations extended beyond ordinary timber work. A particularly chilling report came from a traveling merchant, Silas Reed, who had previously done business with the brothers. In a letter later submitted to county records, Reed described visiting the mill one afternoon and witnessing a group of men moving objects of indeterminate shape into the basement, covered with tarps and blankets, all done with an attention to secrecy that I had not thought necessary for mere timber. While Reed was uncertain of the contents, his account added to the emerging picture of concealed, possibly illicit activity, corroborated in part by other local testimonies. Investigation intensified when the constables discovered partially obscured cellar doors beneath the mill's main floor. Historical documents note that these doors were reinforced and cleverly integrated into the sawmill's structure, making casual detection nearly impossible. Inside, investigators found remnants of wooden crates, some containing unidentifiable organic material. One county journal entry states, "Contents cannot be conclusively determined, however, decomposition indicates extended interment." This discovery, combined with prior reports, suggested the Whitmores were using subterranean storage in ways that eluded conventional oversight. Midway through the spring, a casual reference to Phelps County's broader, historical context reinforces the environment in which the Whitmores operated. The county, heavily wooded and sparsely populated, had long been the setting for rumors of disappearances and clandestine activity. Local newspapers occasionally mentioned missing travelers or livestock, yet few records detailed the systematic concealment observed at the Whitmore property. County survey maps from the 1880s reveal how natural topography, dense trees, uneven hills, and hidden creek banks facilitated secrecy, providing the brothers ample opportunity to work unnoticed. By May, investigative pressure had begun to affect the Whitmores' behavior. Harlan and Silas became increasingly reclusive, speaking only in terse statements to visitors or officials. Local accounts suggest they heightened surveillance of the surrounding area, reportedly stationing dogs and even hiring temporary laborers solely to maintain secrecy. One affidavit notes that a hired man, returning from the creek, spoke little, looked over his shoulder constantly, and would not linger near the mill longer than required. Despite these measures, reports of unexplained sounds and odors continued. Residents described metallic clinks, the hiss of hydraulic equipment, or something that mimicked it, and a pervasive, sour scent, all seemingly emanating from the mill at hours when only the brothers were present. A visiting clergyman noted in his journal, "One could hear the labor of unseen hands, a grinding not of wood, but of some other, darker material." These persistent observations, while anecdotal, were consistently cited in investigators' notes and later retrospective accounts of the case. The spring of 1888 set the stage for a pivotal escalation. The pattern of secretive operations, nighttime activity, and vanished individuals increasingly implicated the Whitmores in deeds beyond ordinary sawmill work. Investigators, constrained by limited technology and the harsh terrain, could only document anomalies and disturbances, leaving the county with a growing sense of dread and uncertainty. The mills hummed, the woods whispered, and the small, isolated community began to grasp the unnerving scope of what lay beneath the Whitmores' meticulous surface. By early summer 1888, the Whitmore sawmill had become a locus of both fear and fascination in Phelps County. Summer storms frequently swept through the backwoods, Yet the mill continued operations even in inclement weather, its lanterns flickering through dense fog as though warding off intruders. County ledgers and diaries from the period note that the brothers' vigilance was near constant. Workers and neighbors alike observed that Harlan and Silas appeared to anticipate visitors, ready to conceal anything deemed untoward. One journal entry from a visiting surveyor describes the scene. The brothers moved with a deliberation that suggested every plank and every board was known intimately, as though the mill itself was a living entity. Investigation during this period focused increasingly on subterranean structures. In June 1888, county constables unearthed additional compartments beneath the mill floor while attempting routine maintenance inspections. These spaces, reinforced with heavy planks and hidden beneath false floors, contained remnants of crates and organic matter too decomposed for identification. A report submitted by Sheriff Jonathan Peters states, "Evidence suggests repeated concealment, yet the contents cannot be positively ascertained. Activity continues with a deliberate regularity. Such documentation reflects the restrained, factual approach of late 19th century law enforcement, avoiding speculation while recording anomalies." Accounts from local residents added texture to the emerging narrative. Martha Jennings, a neighbor who lived downstream, recalled seeing wagons arriving under cover of darkness, their loads shielded with tarps, only to depart hours later empty. In her affidavit, she notes, "I could not see what was beneath the coverings, yet I am certain it was not lumber." Similarly, a traveling merchant named Amos Reed reported hearing what he described as a grinding and cracking not consistent with timber, accompanied by a pungent, sour odor that clung to the air for hours. These reports were carefully catalogued by the sheriff's office and later referenced in county historical compilations, emphasizing the persistent pattern of unusual activity. Midway through the summer, investigators began cross-referencing these accounts with Phelps County's broader historical context. The region, heavily wooded and sparsely populated, had a long history of disappearances and unexplained phenomena. A local history compiled in 1885 mentions the secrets the hills carry, a line frequently cited in later reflections on the Whitmore case. Such references highlighted how the county's topography and isolation contributed to the brothers' ability to operate without immediate scrutiny. By July, disappearances became more conspicuous. Two itinerant laborers, whose employment at the mill was confirmed through letters and ledger entries, failed to return home. A neighbor, Samuel Cartwright, claimed to have seen them led into the mill under supervision but never emerge. County records note that while no physical evidence could directly link the Whitmores to these men's fate, the pattern of vanishing individuals was too consistent to ignore. Investigators documented the cases meticulously, noting times, witness statements, and the brothers' observed behaviors, but the lack of bodies or incontrovertible proof prevented formal charges. The Whitmores' behavior also shifted noticeably. Harlan, previously meticulous but approachable, became increasingly hostile to inquiries, often refusing to answer questions or offering evasive responses. Silas, formerly taciturn, grew visibly anxious, glancing toward the mill's floorboards as if guarding some secret. Journal entries from the period detail the brothers' heightened vigilance, their insistence on controlling all movement on the property, and their apparent anticipation of investigative scrutiny. By the end of July 1888, the stage was set for a disturbing discovery that would cement the Whitmores' infamy in local memory. Investigators, armed with mounting reports, diaries, and affidavits, began to focus on the mill's hidden compartments and disturbed soil. The combination of eyewitness testimony, ledger anomalies, and physical irregularities suggested a systematic concealment of activities far beyond ordinary timber processing. The surrounding community, meanwhile, grew wary, avoiding paths near the mill and speaking in hushed tones of the grinding brothers and their enigmatic operations. By late summer 1888, the Whitmore Sawmill had become synonymous with unease throughout Phelps County. Investigators noted that the brothers had begun restricting access even further, insisting that deliveries, inspections, and any visitors occur only under their direct supervision. County affidavits from the period describe Harlan Whitmore as watchful to the point of obsession, while Silas reportedly moved as if shadows themselves followed his intent. The atmosphere surrounding the mill, once merely curious, had now evolved into one of palpable dread among neighbors and traveling tradesmen alike. In August, local authorities began a more methodical inspection of the property. Constables documented unusual soil patterns near the mill's foundation and the creek, indicating repeated excavation. Some depressions revealed remnants of wooden crates, though the contents were often decayed beyond recognition. Sheriff Peters' notes from the inspection remain clinically detached. The compartments are of human construction, repeated activity evident, materials indeterminate. Observations suggest deliberate concealment, while avoiding conjecture. These records laid the groundwork for subsequent investigative action. Witness testimony continued to accumulate. A farmer named Elijah Harper reported seeing the brothers transporting heavy, tarpaulin-covered loads from the mill toward the creek at dawn, returning empty before sunrise. Another affidavit from a traveling preacher describes a grinding sound not wholly of wood, accompanied by a rank odor that clung to the night air and sickened the horses. While each account was recorded separately, the patterns, nocturnal activity, concealed objects, unexplained noises, formed a consistent narrative suggesting that the Whitmores' operations extended far beyond ordinary logging. Casual reference to Phelps County's broader history reinforces the context. The region, densely wooded and sparsely populated, had long been home to missing persons and unexplained events. A county history from 1885 notes that the hills hold secrets older than the towns themselves, a sentiment invoked by investigators as they attempted to frame the Whitmores' activity without resorting to unverified claims. This historical lens provided both perspective and caution, acknowledging that isolation often amplified ordinary occurrences into perceived mysteries. The escalation became undeniable when two itinerant laborers, known to have worked briefly at the mill, vanished without trace. Their absence was first noted by a local merchant who had delivered supplies and later confirmed through ledger entries and witness statements. The sheriff's office meticulously documented these incidents, noting times, observed behaviors, and the brothers' responses. Yet without physical evidence of the men's fate, formal charges were impossible. The pattern of disappearances reinforced both suspicion and fear, leaving the county with unresolved questions. By September 1888, the Whitmores' guarded behavior intensified. Investigators noted that Harlan and Silas monitored all movements on the property, often pacing near concealed floorboards or inspecting hidden compartments. Local children were warned to stay clear of the mill, and neighbors altered their routes to avoid passing nearby. Journal entries from this period describe an almost oppressive atmosphere. One cannot hear the wind through the trees without sensing that something waits unseen, that the mill itself harbors intentions not of timber or trade. A pivotal discovery occurred when constables identified a hidden cellar beneath the mill. The access was cleverly concealed, requiring the removal of heavy planks and the lifting of a false floor. Inside, investigators found crates and remnants of organic material in various states of decay. The official report notes, contents cannot be positively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment and concealment. Activity continues with deliberate precision. The clinical tone masks the gravity of the find, which suggested that the Whitmores' activities were both systematic and prolonged. By the end of September, the Backwoods community of Phelps County had come to view the mill as a place of dread. Nighttime activity, unexplained sounds, and repeated disappearances had shifted the mill from a site of industrious labor to one of ominous mystery. Investigators, constrained by the limits of 19th-century forensic practice and the challenging terrain, could document disturbances but could not fully reveal what lay beneath the Whitmores' meticulous surface. The stage was set for the deeper unraveling of the brothers' secrets, a process that would extend into the autumn and leave a lingering shadow over the region for decades to come. As October 1888 arrived, The tension surrounding the Whitmore sawmill had reached a near-constant hum among Phelps County residents. Local journals and affidavits reveal that the brothers' nocturnal activity persisted despite cooler temperatures and earlier nightfall. Lanterns flickered within the mill as though anticipating intrusion, and observers consistently described seeing shadows moving beneath the boards, a phrase that appears repeatedly in both private diaries and official county notes. The environment, dense with timber and fog, amplified these eerie impressions, giving rise to whispers of something hidden, something deliberate. During this period, investigators intensified their scrutiny. Constables, accompanied by deputies, conducted detailed inspections of the mill's foundations and surrounding soil. Repeatedly disturbed earth was mapped in county records, and small wooden compartments beneath the mill floorboards were carefully documented. In one memorandum, the sheriff noted, "Compartments reveal signs of repeated use. Organic matter present but too decomposed for positive identification. Observed patterns suggest systematic concealment." These findings, clinical in tone, nonetheless indicated an underlying activity beyond ordinary timber processing. Witness accounts added layers of unsettling detail. Neighbor Thomas Keegan recalled hearing grinding noises at odd hours and noticing wagons arriving under cover of darkness. In an affidavit preserved in county archives, Keegan stated, "The loads were covered, and yet I could discern movement within. It was not mere timber." Similarly, a traveling preacher wrote of a pervasive, sour odor that seemed to emanate from the mill, accompanied by a rhythm of labor not accounted for by the saws alone. Collectively, these testimonies suggested both deliberate concealment and activity outside conventional logging practices. A casual reference to Phelps County's broader historical context reinforces the environment in which the Whitmores operated. The county, heavily wooded and sparsely populated, had long been associated with missing persons and unexplained events. An 1885 county history mentions the "secrets the hills carry," a phrase that investigators later cited when contextualizing the Whitmores' behavior. Such references underscore that while the county was no stranger to rumor, the systematic nature of the Whitmores' operations was extraordinary even for this isolated region. By mid-October, the pattern of disappearances had expanded. 2 itinerant laborers who briefly worked at the mill failed to return, their absence noted by multiple witnesses and corroborated by ledger entries. While no bodies were recovered, investigators documented the men's last known movements and the brothers' guarded responses, creating a growing dossier of suspicion. County journals emphasized that while evidence was circumstantial, the repetition and consistency of reports warranted continued attention. The Whitmores' demeanor grew increasingly guarded. Harlan Whitmore, previously meticulous but approachable, became terse and defensive, while Silas appeared increasingly anxious, often pacing near floorboards or inspecting hidden compartments. Journal entries from local residents describe a palpable tension in the air. One hears the mills, sees the flicker of lanterns, and senses that the earth itself holds secrets not meant to be seen. A significant discovery occurred when constables managed to access a concealed cellar beneath the mill. The opening, carefully hidden, led to a small subterranean space containing crates and partially decomposed organic material. The sheriff's report described the find in restrained language. Contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence of repeated interment is present. Activity is deliberate and systematic. While avoiding speculation, the documentation suggested that the Whitmores were concealing materials that could not be accounted for through ordinary logging operations. By late October, the combination of night-time activity, repeated soil disturbances, and unexplained disappearances had cemented the Whitmores' reputation as enigmatic and potentially dangerous figures. The Phelps County community, already attuned to the isolation of their environment, now viewed the mill with caution and apprehension. Investigators, constrained by limited forensic techniques and the challenges of terrain, could chronicle the anomalies but could not fully uncover the scope of the brothers' concealed activities, leaving the region in a state of unresolved tension and foreboding. By November 1888, The Whitmore Sawmill had become an enduring enigma for both locals and law enforcement in Phelps County. Winter approached, and with it came early nightfall, yet the mill's lanterns remained alight, casting long shadows across the hollowed land. Investigators and witnesses alike described a pervasive sense of watchfulness. It was as if the mill itself observed the surrounding woods. In one surviving journal entry from Reverend Amos Telford, he wrote, "The lamps glimmer in the dark, and the forest holds its breath as though knowing what transpires beneath those boards." Such observations, though anecdotal, were repeatedly cited in official county reports. During the first week of November, constables noted that previously disturbed soil near the mill had been freshly covered. Small depressions aligned with the mill's foundation suggested recent excavation or interment. County records carefully document these findings. Repeated human agency observed, materials within remain indeterminate. Activity appears deliberate and sustained. Investigators' clinical tone contrasted sharply with the unsettling implications, but the pattern of behavior was unmistakable. Local testimonies continued to accumulate. Neighbor Thomas Keegan observed the brothers moving covered loads into hidden compartments late at night. He later recalled, "The shape beneath the tarpaulins shifted, not lumber, yet I could not see clearly what it was. It was deliberate, methodical, and secretive." Similarly, traveling merchants and clergy noted unusual sounds emanating from the mill, grinding, clinking, and low thuds inconsistent with ordinary sawmill operations. A sour, acrid odor sometimes accompanied these noises, adding to the perception of concealed and illicit activity. Midway through the month, investigators drew upon the broader history of Phelps County to contextualize the situation. The region, heavily forested and sparsely populated, had long been associated with disappearances and other unexplained occurrences. An 1885 county history mentions the "secrets the hills carry," a phrase later referenced by officials and researchers examining the Whitmores. This historical perspective underscored the isolation and natural concealment the brothers exploited, allowing them to operate largely unobserved for extended periods. By late November, multiple disappearances had been noted among itinerant workers and casual laborers at the mill. 2 men, whose employment at the property was verified by ledger entries, vanished without trace. Witnesses observed them entering the mill but never leaving. Investigators documented the events meticulously, recording times, observed behaviors, and the brothers' evasive statements. Yet the lack of direct evidence prevented formal charges. Nevertheless, the accumulation of circumstantial evidence painted a clearer picture of systematic concealment and possible criminal activity. The brothers themselves grew increasingly vigilant. Harlan Whitmore, formerly meticulous but approachable, began responding tersely to all inquiries, while Silas, previously taciturn, displayed visible anxiety, often inspecting floorboards or hidden compartments. Diaries and local letters described the atmosphere as oppressive. "The mill hums in the dark, the air carries a weight not of timber, but of some hidden knowledge." Such descriptions, preserved in county records, illustrate the pervasive unease surrounding the property. A pivotal discovery occurred when investigators accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill. The entry, disguised beneath reinforced planks, revealed small crates containing decomposed organic material. The sheriff's official report states, "Contents cannot be positively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity is deliberate and methodical, though recorded clinically." The findings suggested systematic concealment beyond the bounds of ordinary sawmill operations. By the end of November, the Whitmore Mill had cemented its reputation as a site of mystery and fear. Investigators, constrained by terrain, weather, and limited forensic techniques, could document anomalies but not fully comprehend the brothers' operations. Locals avoided the area. Children were warned to steer clear, and a tense hush settled over the hollowed land. The stage was set for deeper revelations to emerge in the coming months, yet even these early discoveries left an enduring sense of unresolved dread. By December 1888, the Whitmore Sawmill had become a focal point of both fear and speculation in Phelps County. Winter storms swept through the hollows, leaving snow, draped trees, and frozen creeks, yet the mill remained unnervingly active. County reports note lanterns burning late into the night and the persistent hum of saws, accompanied by intermittent, unaccountable noises. Witnesses recorded that even the wind seemed muffled near the property, as if the surrounding forest itself conspired to obscure what lay within. The investigation intensified when deputies returned to the mill following reports of fresh soil disturbances. Several depressions, partially hidden by snow and brush, appeared to have been recently filled. County records described these findings with restrained precision. Evidence of repeated human activity observed, contents undetermined, excavations deliberate, indicating knowledge of concealment. While formal charges were impossible, these repeated disturbances signaled methodical behavior that could no longer be ignored. Eyewitness accounts continued to accumulate. Farmer Elijah Harper reported seeing wagons entering the property under cover of darkness, returning empty before sunrise. Neighbor Thomas Keegan observed shadows moving beneath floorboards and heard sounds inconsistent with timber processing, grinding and cracking accompanied by a pungent, sour odor. Each testimony was carefully cataloged in county records, creating a dossier that, while circumstantial, suggested the Whitmores engaged in activities far beyond ordinary logging. A midwinter reference to Phelps County's history provides context for these events. The region's dense forests and sparse settlements had long been associated with disappearances and unexplained phenomena. An 1885 county history notes that the Alls and Hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a sentiment frequently invoked in reports analyzing the Whitmores' operations. This context underscores how the brothers' isolation allowed them to conduct their activities largely unobserved while intensifying local suspicions. By mid-December, disappearances among itinerant workers and casual laborers had become increasingly conspicuous. 2 men, verified as having worked at the mill through ledger entries and witness statements, failed to return home. Investigators documented the circumstances meticulously, noting the brothers' defensive responses and the temporal correlation between vanished men and unusual nocturnal activity. While direct evidence remained elusive, the cumulative pattern of disappearances, hidden compartments, and unaccountable sounds made a compelling, if incomplete, case for suspicion. The brothers' behavior became increasingly guarded. Harlan Whitmore, previously meticulous but approachable, began issuing terse statements and limiting all interaction. Silas, previously taciturn, exhibited visible anxiety, frequently pacing near floorboards or inspecting hidden compartments. Letters and journals from locals described the atmosphere as oppressive, noting that even the natural elements seemed subdued around the mill. The snow falls quietly here, as if the world itself holds its breath for what transpires beneath those planks. A significant development occurred when constables managed to access the mill's concealed cellar. Hidden beneath reinforced planks, investigators found small crates containing decomposed organic material. The sheriff's report states, "Contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence suggests repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical. Though the language is clinical, the implications were unmistakable. The Whitmores were systematically concealing materials that could not be explained by ordinary logging practices." By the end of December 1888, the Whitmore Mill had become a symbol of unease in the county. Residents avoided the property, children were cautioned, and investigators, limited by terrain and technology, could document anomalies but not fully uncover the scope of the brothers' concealed activities. The winter closed in, leaving the community with a lingering sense of unresolved dread and anticipation of revelations yet to come as the Whitmores continued their meticulous and secretive work. By January 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had become an entrenched subject of concern and speculation throughout Phelps County. The snow-laden woods amplified the silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the mill or distant cracking of timber, which some locals swore carried an unnatural resonance. County records note that lanterns burned late into the night, suggesting that Harlan and Silas maintained constant oversight of the property. Witnesses recalled a watchfulness in the air, that seemed to extend beyond human observation, an impression often referenced in later historical reflections on the case. The first weeks of January brought renewed investigative efforts. Constables revisited previously disturbed soil near the mill foundation, uncovering fresh depressions partially concealed by undergrowth and snow. Official reports described these findings with precise detachment. Repeated human activity observed, contents cannot be positively determined. Patterns suggest systematic concealment and long-term planning. These clinical notes, while avoiding speculation, underscore the deliberate nature of the Whitmore's operations. Eyewitness testimony continued to accumulate. Neighbor Thomas Keegan reported observing Harlan and Silas transporting covered loads at night, their movements deliberate and precise. A traveling merchant noted unusual sounds within the mill, grinding and heavy thumps inconsistent with ordinary timber work, alongside a persistent acrid scent. County records cataloged these accounts alongside earlier affidavits, emphasizing consistency in reports of concealed and anomalous activity. Historical context provides additional perspective. Phelps County, sparsely populated and heavily forested, had long been associated with disappearances and unexplained phenomena. An 1885 county history notes that the region's hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a description frequently cited in documentation of the Whitmore case. This historical framing highlights how the county's isolation and geography enabled the brothers' covert operations while intensifying community apprehension. By mid-January, disappearances among itinerant laborers became increasingly conspicuous. 2 men, confirmed through ledger entries to have worked at the mill, vanished without trace. Investigators documented these absences meticulously, noting temporal correlations between the men's last observed activities and nocturnal movements of the brothers. Though no bodies or conclusive evidence were recovered, the pattern of vanishings reinforced suspicions and underscored the likelihood of systematic concealment. The Whitmore's demeanor grew increasingly guarded. Harlan, previously meticulous but communicative, responded tersely to inquiries, while Silas exhibited noticeable anxiety, frequently inspecting floorboards and hidden compartments. Letters and journals from residents describe an oppressive atmosphere. One walks the hollows near the mill and feels the trees lean closer, as if observing what transpires beneath the boards. Such descriptions, preserved in local archives, reflect the deep unease that permeated the area. A significant discovery was made when constables accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill. Hidden beneath reinforced planks, investigators found crates containing decomposed organic matter. The sheriff's report recorded. Contents cannot be positively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical. While recorded clinically, these findings suggested that the Whitmores were systematically concealing materials beyond ordinary logging operations. By the end of January 1889, the Whitmore mill had become emblematic of both dread and intrigue. Residents avoided the property, children were cautioned, and investigators, constrained by the limits of 19th-century forensic techniques and harsh terrain, could document anomalies but could not fully uncover the scope of the brothers' concealed activities. The county remained poised on the edge of unease, anticipating further revelations as the brothers continued their secretive operations amid the quiet, snowbound backwoods. By February 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had entrenched itself in local consciousness as a place of unease and whispered suspicion. The winter landscape, stark and silent, heightened the sense of isolation. County records note that the mill remained operational despite heavy snowfall, with lanterns flickering through the gloom as the brothers maintained a meticulous and ceaseless vigilance. Observers, both neighbors and itinerant travelers, remarked on an almost tangible sense of watchfulness surrounding the property, a subtle but persistent tension recorded in multiple affidavits. Investigative efforts increased during the month. Constables and deputies revisited disturbed soil patches along the mill foundation and the creek bank, finding new depressions consistent with repeated human activity. County journals meticulously noted, "Ground disturbed, repeated interment evident. Materials present are decomposed beyond positive identification. Activity deliberate and sustained. These findings, though clinically recorded, implied a methodical pattern of concealment and heightened the growing suspicion that the mill hid more than it revealed. Eyewitness testimony continued to accumulate. Neighbor Thomas Keegan described seeing the brothers moving covered loads at night with deliberate precision. A traveling merchant, Amos Reed, reported hearing sounds from within the mill that grated and ground in a manner inconsistent with timber, accompanied by a pervasive, acrid odor that clung to the air for hours. These accounts, cataloged alongside prior statements, created a consistent pattern of nocturnal activity, unusual smells, and hidden operations, reinforcing the perception that the Whitmores were concealing something significant. Historical context of Phelps County further frames these events. The region's dense forests and sparse settlements had long been associated with disappearances and unexplained phenomena. An 1885 county history notes that the hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a phrase frequently cited by investigators studying the Whitmores. This perspective underscores how the county's isolation and topography facilitated secretive behavior, while also cultivating a community predisposed to suspicion and caution. By mid-February, disappearances among itinerant workers became increasingly conspicuous. 2 men, confirmed through ledger entries to have worked at the mill, vanished without trace. Investigators meticulously documented these cases, noting temporal correlations between their last observed activities and nocturnal movements by the brothers. Although no direct evidence linked the Whitmores to these disappearances, the repeated pattern and consistency of reports warranted continued scrutiny. The brothers' demeanor grew more guarded and defensive. Harlan, previously meticulous but approachable, limited his interactions, while Silas exhibited visible anxiety, frequently inspecting floorboards and concealed compartments. Letters and diaries from local residents describe a palpable tension. The mill hums in the cold night, the snow falls quietly. Yet one senses a weight not of timber, but of unseen labor beneath the boards. Such observations were cataloged alongside official reports, creating a dossier that reflected both circumstantial evidence and community apprehension. A significant development occurred when investigators accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill. Hidden beneath reinforced planks, the space contained crates and partially decomposed organic matter. The sheriff's report notes, contents cannot be positively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical. While clinical in tone, the implications were unmistakable. The Whitmores maintained a systematic practice of concealing materials beyond ordinary sawmill operations. By the end of February 1889, the Whitmore sawmill had become a locus of fear, mystery, and speculation. Residents avoided the area, children were warned away, and investigators, constrained by terrain technology and the limits of 19th-century forensics, documented anomalies without fully uncovering the brothers' activities. The stage was set for further discoveries, yet the shadow cast by the mill and its operators continued to evoke uncertainty, leaving the Phelps County backwoods suspended between observation and the unknown. By March 1889, the Whitmore sawmill had fully solidified its reputation as a place of quiet dread in Phelps County. The early spring thaw revealed additional evidence of repeated excavation near the mill foundation and along the creek that cut through the property. County records from this period meticulously note these findings: ground disturbed at multiple locations. Evidence of repeated interment apparent. Materials too decomposed for positive identification. Activity deliberate and continuous. These clinical observations, devoid of conjecture, nonetheless implied systematic concealment. Eyewitnesses continued to provide corroborative detail. Neighbor Thomas Keegan reported seeing the brothers moving heavy, tarpaulin-covered loads at night, while a traveling merchant described hearing grinding and cracking noises that seemed unnatural for a sawmill. The same merchant noted an acrid, sour odor lingering around the property, reinforcing suspicions that activities within the mill extended beyond timber processing. County records cataloged these accounts alongside affidavits and diary entries, creating a cumulative picture of unusual nocturnal operations. Historical context again frames the events. Phelps County, densely forested and sparsely populated, had a long-standing reputation for disappearances and unexplained occurrences. An 1885 county history notes that the hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a line invoked by investigators to contextualize the Whitmore's activity. The region's isolation and natural concealment facilitated covert operations, allowing the brothers to maintain secrecy despite growing scrutiny. By mid-March, the pattern of disappearances among itinerant workers and casual laborers had expanded. 2 men, confirmed to have briefly worked at the mill, failed to return home. Investigators meticulously documented their last known movements, the timing of nocturnal activity, and the brothers' evasive responses. While no bodies were recovered, the consistent nature of these reports suggested systematic concealment, increasing both suspicion and unease among local authorities. The Whitmores themselves became noticeably more vigilant. Harlan, once meticulous but approachable, began issuing terse statements and limiting contact, while Silas, previously taciturn, exhibited increasing anxiety, often pacing near floorboards and inspecting hidden compartments. Letters and journals from local residents describe an oppressive atmosphere around the mill. Even the wind seems stilled near the property, as though the forest itself holds its breath for what is concealed beneath the boards. These sentiments, recorded alongside formal investigative notes, illustrate the pervasive tension surrounding the site. A significant discovery occurred when constables accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill, hidden beneath reinforced planks. Inside were small crates containing decomposed organic material. The sheriff's report states, "Contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence suggests repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical." While the language remains clinical, the implications were unmistakable. The Whitmores were engaged in systematic concealment beyond ordinary logging practices. By the end of March 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had become emblematic of both fear and intrigue in the county. Residents avoided the property, children were cautioned, and investigators, constrained by the limitations of contemporary forensic methods and challenging terrain, could document anomalies without fully uncovering the scope of the brothers' operations. The woods whispered with uncertainty, the mill hummed with hidden labor, and the county remained suspended between observation and the unknown, anticipating further revelations in the months ahead. By April 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had entrenched itself as a locus of unease in Phelps County. The early spring rains softened the ground, revealing further signs of repeated excavation near the mill and along the creek. County records detail these disturbances with clinical precision: ground disturbed, repeated interment evident, contents decomposed beyond identification. Activity deliberate and systematic. While no bodies or definitive evidence of criminal activity were recovered, these patterns reinforced suspicions that the mill concealed more than ordinary timber operations. Eyewitness testimony continued to mount. Neighbor Thomas Keegan reported seeing the brothers move tarpaulin-covered loads at night with meticulous care. A traveling merchant described sounds emanating from the mill that were inconsistent with standard sawmill work: grinding, cracking, and thuds accompanied by a persistent sour odor. County affidavits and diaries meticulously cataloged these observations, building a consistent narrative of secretive nocturnal activity and concealed operations. Historical context again frames the situation. Phelps County, heavily forested and sparsely populated, had long been associated with disappearances and unexplained phenomena. An 1885 county history notes that the hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a phrase often cited in investigative reports examining the Whitmores. The county's isolation and natural concealment facilitated the brothers' covert activities, allowing them to operate largely unobserved while amplifying local fear and suspicion. By mid-April, disappearances among itinerant laborers became increasingly noticeable. 2 men, verified as having worked at the mill through ledger entries, vanished without trace. Investigators documented their last known movements and the brothers' evasive responses, noting temporal correlations with nocturnal activity. While direct evidence was lacking, the repeated pattern of disappearances and hidden labor suggested systematic concealment and raised the likelihood of foul play. The Whitmores' demeanor grew increasingly guarded. Harlan, once meticulous but approachable, now offered terse statements and avoided unnecessary contact. Silas, previously taciturn, displayed visible anxiety, pacing near floorboards and inspecting hidden compartments. Residents' letters and diaries describe a palpable tension surrounding the mill. Even the forest seems to hold its breath near the property, as though the earth itself conspires to conceal what lies beneath the boards. These accounts, combined with formal investigative notes, illustrate the oppressive atmosphere enveloping the mill and its operators. A pivotal discovery occurred when constables accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill, hidden beneath reinforced planks. The space contained crates and partially decomposed organic matter. The sheriff's report notes, contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical. The clinical tone belied the gravity of the find, suggesting that the Whitmores were systematically concealing materials beyond the scope of ordinary sawmill operations. By the end of April 1889, the Whitmore sawmill had cemented its place in local lore as a site of dread and mystery. Residents avoided the property, children were warned, and investigators, constrained by terrain, weather, and the limits of contemporary forensic practice, could only chronicle anomalies without fully uncovering the brothers' concealed activities. The mill hummed, the woods whispered, and Phelps County remained suspended between observation and the unknown, anticipating further revelations while the Whitmores continued their meticulous, secretive work. By May 1889, the Whitmore sawmill had become a persistent source of fear and speculation in Phelps County. Spring had softened the ground, exposing further evidence of repeated excavation near the mill and along the creek. County records describe these findings with restrained precision. Ground disturbed, evidence of repeated interment. Materials decomposed beyond positive identification. Activity deliberate and sustained. While no conclusive evidence of criminal activity was present, the pattern of disturbances suggested careful and systematic concealment. Eyewitness reports continued to accumulate. Neighbor Thomas Keegan described observing the brothers transporting covered loads at night, moving with deliberate precision. A traveling merchant noted grinding and cracking sounds inconsistent with ordinary sawmill operations, accompanied by a persistent, acrid odor. County affidavits and diaries meticulously cataloged these accounts, painting a consistent picture of secretive nocturnal activity, concealed materials, and a pervasive sense of dread surrounding the property. The historical context of Phelps County further informs the case. The region, densely forested and sparsely populated, had long been associated with disappearances and unexplained phenomena. An 1885 county history notes that the hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a phrase often invoked in later reports on the Whitmores. The natural isolation of the county, combined with the difficult terrain, allowed the brothers to operate largely unobserved while amplifying local suspicion and fear. By mid-May, the pattern of disappearances among itinerant laborers became increasingly pronounced. 2 men, confirmed to have worked briefly at the mill, vanished without a trace. Investigators documented the circumstances meticulously, noting the temporal correlation with nocturnal activity and the brothers' evasive behavior. Although no bodies were recovered, the repeated nature of these incidents suggested systematic concealment and raised suspicions of foul play. The Whitmores themselves grew increasingly wary. Harlan, once meticulous but approachable, began issuing terse statements and avoided interaction. Silas, previously taciturn, displayed visible anxiety, pacing near floorboards and inspecting hidden compartments. Letters and journals from local residents convey a heavy atmosphere surrounding the mill. The forest seems to still itself near the property, as though aware of secrets hidden beneath the boards. Such observations, preserved alongside official records, illustrate the pervasive tension enveloping the site. A key development occurred when constables accessed the mill's concealed cellar, hidden beneath reinforced planks. Inside, small crates contained partially decomposed organic matter. The sheriff's report records. Contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical. The clinical phrasing belies the gravity of the find, pointing to systematic concealment extending beyond ordinary timber processing. By the end of May 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had become emblematic of fear, mystery, and unease in Phelps County. Locals avoided the property, children were warned, and investigators, limited by the constraints of terrain, weather, and 19th-century forensic techniques, could document anomalies but not fully uncover the brothers' activities. The woods whispered, the mill hummed, and the county remained suspended between observation and the unknown, anticipating further developments while the Whitmores continued their secretive operations. By June 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had entrenched itself as a persistent source of unease and intrigue in Phelps County. Summer storms swept through the backwoods, yet the mill remained eerily active, its lanterns flickering late into the night. County records describe the brothers' vigilance as near constant, with repeated notations of nocturnal activity and disturbed soil near the mill and creek. Clinical entries in the sheriff's logs read, ground disturbed, repeated interment evident, materials decomposed beyond positive identification. Activity deliberate and systematic. These precise observations reflected the methodical concealment practices the Whitmores maintained. Eyewitness reports continued to reinforce suspicion. Neighbor Thomas Keegan recounted seeing the brothers transporting covered loads at night with meticulous care. A traveling merchant described unusual sounds from within the mill, grinding, cracking, and thuds inconsistent with ordinary timber operations, accompanied by an acrid, sour odor lingering for hours. County affidavits and diary entries meticulously cataloged these observations, establishing a pattern of nocturnal operations, hidden materials, and an air of secrecy enveloping the property. Historical context provides additional perspective. Phelps County, densely forested and sparsely populated, had a long-standing reputation for disappearances and unexplained events. An 1885 county history notes that the hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a phrase frequently cited by investigators studying the Whitmores. The region's isolation and terrain allowed covert operations, enabling the brothers to maintain secrecy while amplifying local suspicion. By mid-June, disappearances among itinerant workers and casual laborers became increasingly conspicuous. 2 men, confirmed via ledger entries to have worked at the mill, vanished without trace. Investigators documented the circumstances, noting temporal correlations with nocturnal activity and the brothers' evasive behavior. While no bodies were recovered, the repeated pattern suggested systematic concealment and elevated suspicions of foul play. The Whitmores themselves became progressively more guarded. Harlan, once meticulous but approachable, now offered terse statements and limited contact with outsiders. Silas, previously taciturn, displayed visible anxiety, frequently pacing near floorboards and inspecting hidden compartments. Letters and diaries from locals described the oppressive atmosphere surrounding the mill. Even the wind seems subdued near the property, as though the forest itself conceals what lies beneath the boards. These accounts, paired with official documentation, illustrate the pervasive tension enveloping the site. A significant discovery occurred when constables accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill, hidden beneath reinforced planks. Inside, crates contained partially decomposed organic material. The sheriff's report notes, contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical, though clinical. These findings implied that the Whitmores were engaged in systematic concealment far beyond ordinary logging operations. By the end of June 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had become a locus of fear and speculation. Residents avoided the property, children were warned, and investigators, constrained by terrain and the limits of contemporary forensic methods, could document anomalies without fully uncovering the brothers' operations. The mill hummed in the backwoods, whispers lingered in the forest, and Phelps County remained suspended between observation and the unknown, with the Whitmore's secretive labor continuing to shroud the site in mystery. By July 1889, the Whitmore Sawmill had become a legend of unease throughout Phelps County, its reputation cemented by months of meticulous observation, witness accounts, and circumstantial evidence. Summer heat drew only fleeting visitors as locals continued to avoid the property. Diaries and letters from neighbors described the mill as humming in the hollow like a living thing, a description that evokes both the ceaseless work within and the persistent fear surrounding it. Lanterns continued to flicker late into the night, and the brothers' vigilance appeared unwavering, as if anticipating any intrusion. Investigators revisited the mill, focusing again on disturbed soil and concealed compartments. County records from July note, ground shows repeated excavation, contents indeterminate, organic in nature. Evidence suggests deliberate concealment over an extended period. While no bodies were recovered, the clinical tone of the reports highlights the systematic nature of the brothers' concealment, implying intentions and activities that remained frustratingly elusive. Witnesses continued to provide corroborating detail. Neighbor Thomas Keegan observed Harlan and Silas moving covered loads at night with precision, while a traveling merchant reported grinding, cracking, and thudding sounds inconsistent with ordinary timber operations. A lingering, acrid odor often accompanied these noises. These accounts, meticulously documented, collectively suggested that the mill's operations concealed something more sinister than the production of lumber, though direct proof remained absent. Historical references to Phelps County's broader environment help contextualize the Whitmore's secrecy. The county, heavily forested and sparsely populated, had long been the setting for unexplained disappearances and mysterious events. An 1885 county history notes that the hills and hollows carry secrets older than the towns themselves, a sentiment frequently cited in investigative reports on the Whitmores. This perspective illustrates how the region's isolation and terrain allowed the brothers to operate largely unobserved, while heightening community anxiety and suspicion. By mid-July, patterns of disappearances among itinerant laborers had intensified. 2 men, confirmed through ledger entries to have worked at the mill, vanished without trace. Investigators documented the last known movements of these men alongside temporal correlations with nocturnal activity by the brothers. While no definitive evidence linked the Whitmores to these disappearances, the repeated and consistent pattern implied systematic concealment and deliberate obfuscation. The Whitmores' demeanor had grown increasingly insular. Harlan, previously meticulous yet approachable, became terse and uncommunicative. Silas, formerly taciturn, showed heightened anxiety, often inspecting hidden floorboards and compartments. Residents' diaries reflect an oppressive tension surrounding the properties. Even the wind feels restrained near the mill, as though the forest itself holds its breath for what is hidden beneath the boards. Such observations, paired with formal documentation, underscored the pervasive unease enveloping the mill. A final, grim discovery occurred when constables accessed a concealed cellar beneath the mill hidden beneath reinforced planks. Inside, crates contained partially decomposed organic material. The sheriff's report reads, "Contents cannot be conclusively identified. Evidence indicates repeated interment. Activity appears deliberate and methodical. Clinical as it may be, the entry implies that the Whitmores maintained systematic concealment of materials beyond ordinary timber work, leaving investigators with a tangible yet unresolved mystery." By the close of July 1889, the Whitmore sawmill remained an enigma. Locals avoided the area. Children were warned, and investigators, limited by terrain technology and contemporary forensic practice, could only chronicle anomalies without fully uncovering the brothers' activities. The mill hummed, the woods whispered, and the backwoods of Phelps County continued to hold its secrets. To this day, the ruins of the Whitmore Mill, long abandoned, partially collapsed, and overgrown, are said to echo with faint grinding sounds a subtle reminder that some mysteries of the Missouri backwoods resist closure, leaving the Whitmore brothers' true deeds suspended between record and rumor, observation and the unknowable.